Hey everyone, this is going to be another Marxism focused video. I am responding largely to the comments that were left in the last one. I haven't put heaps of thought into it. I've just tried to respond to everything just to try and get the discussion going because I think, yeah, that'll be good. It'll allow more people to participate because my first video was kind of me saying what I think very kind of directly and not succinctly, but with, I guess succinctly with few words, but in such a way that it's kind of like you either are left in a position of agreeing or disagreeing. Whereas I think as we kind of unpack stuff, you'll be able to see more where like my limitations are, where the limitations in other people's arguments are, and there'll be a good composting of ideas. So yeah, it's not going to be anything fancy. I'm just going to read the comments and then read what I've written as notes in response to that. So yeah, strap in. Longtime supporter and great friend of the channel, the feminist your father warned you about, is it's predominantly her comments that I'm going to be responding to. I might call her TFY or something because I'm trying to think of an abbreviation. Yeah, it's a pimp named Slickback. You gotta say the whole thing. All right, so she has written, one thing that I've noticed in the last 5 years or so is how accusations of idpol have become a way for ostensibly left people to justify their own shittiness. Like, is policing some guy in Twitter for using the word bitch going to change the world? Obviously fucking no. But then when women say, look, the sexual environment here is scary and violent, and and also I really need safe access to abortion, you get self-appointed leftist men and some women, even those who actually do have pretty decent class analysis in some ways, come out of the woodwork to scream idpol, idpol. Now, yeah, okay. I just got a conscious thought. I just got a an idea from saying that because like lots of the women in the US are anti-choice or are pro-life, and so it's not idpol so much, but there is a kind of I can't remember what they're called, but they're like the cultural issues. There are certain cultural issues that divide people, and abortion isn't one of them in most places, but it is one of them in America. And I do see a case sometimes for setting that aside when, like, just take the example of the, what's it called? Shame, Pride, the documentary, the movie about the Welsh miners' strike, where gays and lesbians against the miners are supporting the miners, and it's like because they know that when the working class, is strong, then that helps gay people too, and largely because it increases, like when working class is helped, that's what creates a middle class, and most of the rights that different minorities enjoy under capitalism, you essentially have to be middle class to some degree. Like you have to have some surplus cash to be able to enjoy any right under capitalism. So yeah, even the rights that we have under capitalism, they're strongly influenced by your class position. But anyway, that's all nothing to do with what I had written down. So let's get into what I've written down. I really like your comment. I think I don't agree with everything, and I need to clarify certain points, but I think it's a great place to start. So one of the first questions I'm hearing is to do with reform versus revolution. Okay, before I get onto that, I just want to go justify their own shittiness. Now, I don't know what you mean specifically by that. Their shitty politics or their own personal shitty behavior. Because, yeah, it's all, like people are going to be shitty no matter what. And so there are different ways to kind of deal with shit behavior versus unclear, unhelpful politics, I guess. That's what I would clarify. Yeah, so one of the first questions I'm hearing is to do with reform versus revolution. I think this is a really important point to clarify. What do I actually mean when I'm talking about a socialist revolution? You may already know a lot of this, but I'm just going to say it out loud so we are both on the same page. The popular conception is that a revolution is a military process, essentially when a group of men with guns take over the government. But this is the most superficial interpretation of the revolutionary process. There is a difference between a revolution, which involves a whole society, and a coup, which involves a small group of armed individuals. A socialist revolution requires the collective industrial organization of the working class. The free market or the market requires that everyone to view the market requires that everyone view themselves as an individual. This view of society has completely different effects for people in the capitalist class than it does for people in the working class. If a capitalist sees themselves as an individual, it will often increase their personal wealth and power. However, if a working class person sees themselves as an individual, they surrender the most powerful weapon at the hands of the working class, the ability to collectively withhold their labor. The reason why this is so powerful is because on a large enough scale, the workers do not need to hold ground. So unlike a military thing or a blockade or a protest camp, there is no centralized target for the state to apply force towards. For example, when we look at a factory functioning under capitalism, it's not that the workers are disorganized per se, it's that they are currently being organized by the market and the bosses, as opposed to running the workplace themselves. The first step towards collective ownership is a simple union. Even something as basic as collectively deciding that a broken tool needs to be replaced is the beginning of the type of self-governance that socialists are looking for in the world. The idea is that as the union grows and builds solidarity with workers in other industries, the amount of pressure the workers are able to exert increases until the workers can run their own workplaces independently of the capitalist class. So, a revolution is less about when people decide to get guns and shoot the government until it's dead, and more about the point at which workers' organizations become more politically powerful than the existing bourgeois parliament. Winning over the military is usually part of the revolutionary process, so the amount of actual shooting that needs to take place should be minimal. The bulk of the violence usually comes from capitalist countries trying to invade once a revolution has already meant that they have lost the ability to control the country through politics. So in this sense, there doesn't have to be a dichotomy between short-term goals, wages, abortions, whatever they happen to be at the time, and a long-term revolutionary process. However, there is a dichotomy between bourgeois reformist struggles and socialist ones. Bourgeois struggles assume that the existing power structures will stand. This is what allows them to present as time-saving. So, as a result, they are largely focused around waging a battle of ideas. Revolutionary socialist struggles, on the other hand, are about organizing the working class to materially force, as opposed to persuade or debate, concessions from the existing power structures until such a time that enough force can be generated to completely replace capitalism with proletarian democratic alternatives. So there are some quotes, I'm just trying to figure out which order these notes should go in. I'm just going to read this and then we'll see what the fuck happens. However, a radical feminist analysis is bourgeois to the extent that it conceals the class differences between bourgeois men and prole men, or bourgeois women and prole women for that matter. Like a big thing that has been pointed out is that International Women's Day is supposed to be International Working Women's Day, but that doesn't allow politicians and all the bourgeois elements of modern Western feminism to participate because most of them aren't workers. So they had to scrub that little part out and just turn it into International Women's Day, which is clearly to the benefit of the capitalist class. And in that sense, I think there's a stronger case to be made for the connection between socialist revolutions and abortion access than there is between female bourgeois politicians and abortion access, potentially. There are lots of, and female billionaires as well, the kind of, because the feminist analysis would be, well, a female billionaire is part of the female class. So, a female billionaire's existence is going to somehow help proletarian women. But the richest billionaire in Australia is a woman, and she's very conservative. Her father was on TV talking about how he thought they should poison Aboriginal people so he could get access to their land, essentially. The idea that sex would override class, I think, is as flawed as the idea that gender identity would override sex. It's you're talking about a different thing. And so while this may seem radical at first, if we apply this logic to any other category, we can see how it falls down. For instance, do black capitalists and the black working class have the same interests? Do American capitalists and the American working class have the same interests? Saying that proles and capitalists share the same interests is the definition, almost, of bourgeois ideology. And it could be said, well, men or blacks or Americans get privileges from capitalism, so they have the same interests. In fact, this is exactly what the term Karen is doing to middle-class women, assuming because you've got a handbag and a haircut, you are somehow synonymous with capitalism. But that's like saying a prisoner who receives extra privileges has an interest in the prison continuing to exist. Privileges don't equal power. For instance, a parent can allow a child to sit in the front seat of a car, but that doesn't mean the child is now driving the car. I had a little bit about how there's kind of similarities between what happened to Marxism with Stalinism and what happened to feminism and the third wave, in terms of them being, someone could look at it from the outside and go, oh, well, it's obviously going to end in Stalinism because, that's what happened. In the same way, you could say, oh, well, it's obviously going to end in third wave feminism because that's what happened. Just because that's what happened at this point doesn't mean, there were historical reasons that led to those developments that wouldn't, that should be learned from, but aren't necessarily ahistorical, ever-present categories. Also, just so everyone's on the same page, in 1920, the Russian Soviet Republic became the first country in the world, or in the modern era, to allow abortion in all circumstances. And abortion is freely available in China, which has 33% of the world's women, and Cuba. So a third of the women already in the world already have abortion, and they have it because of a socialist struggle. So it's it's clear that the working class and women have that whole, there's no revolution without women's emancipation, and there's no women's emancipation without revolution. So when someone starts talking feminist stuff, but they have no class stuff, that's just bourgeois feminism. And A big part of the reason why capitalist societies started letting women vote was because the USSR was about to beat them. So universal suffrage had been a socialist demand for decades prior to women getting the vote in Britain. And women got the vote in Britain like in between the Russian Revolution happening and the USSR like becoming a country. So you can see that obviously like the position of the working class in general is intertwined with the position of women, and which kind of uh, lends credence to the idea that women's oppression grows out of class oppression, because if it grew out of biology, then it couldn't improve, or like it wouldn't improve uh, or get worse, or it would just be a constant. Russian, Cuban, and Chinese men were all just as male before the revolution as they were after the revolution. So what changed? Yeah, so I guess that's enough on that. In a theory, then continuing to quote TYF, TFY, a theoretical post-Marxist revolutionary in a theoretical post-Marxist revolutionary world, medical care, including termination of unwanted pregnancies, would be routine, open, and safe. Unfortunately for women, we live in capitalism, and we have wombs in capitalism, and we get raped in capitalism, and we don't and we don't have the option of waiting for revolution. So yeah, we're going to have to be terrible little traitors, at least fucking try to push capitalist policies towards something where we have a modicum where we have a modicum of control over our own basic bodily function and integrity. So I just said, so I don't see pushing for reforms as inherently traitorous and counter to working class organizing. It's about how those reforms are fought for. She also said, as women's reproductive labor is recognized in Marxist analysis as being necessary to the perpetuation of capitalism, it's anti-Marxist to dismiss our concerns with social and reproductive politics and violence as being idpol. Again, I'd say it's how they're addressed. They're all kind of the same points. And then another quote from TFY was, I think the inherent conflict between a radical feminist analysis and a Marxist analysis is which came first, the female oppression or the capitalism. I've always seen female oppression as having started much earlier than even some radical feminists do. Rape is the most primitive form of female oppression, and since that started before we even evolved into Homo sapiens, I think it's clear which came first. So I said, I have heard radical feminists argue something similar to this. Just to clarify, the question, as I see it, isn't female oppression or capitalism. The question is biology or social relationships. I question the usefulness of applying the term rape to animal activities. For example, apparently in heat, a female lion can have sex dozens of times a day. During this time, the female lions will bite the testicles of male lions to make them continue having sex when the males obviously don't want to. However, I wouldn't call that oppression or rape, because oppression and rape are both human social categories. Otherwise, we could say things like baby turtles are oppressed by patriarchal neglect when they have to crawl across the beach with seagulls eating them. To me, oppression is when one class of human people, as opposed to an individual, collectively exploits another class of people for material gain. That to me is oppression. If the people who are doing the bad thing aren't gaining resources from it, or aren't doing it collectively, then it's just a shitty thing to do, not oppression. For example, I don't see the exclusion of disabled people as oppression. Instead, I see it as discrimination. The same with discrimination against homosexuals. It's a byproduct of the oppression of women, but class society isn't getting land, people, or wages directly from the discrimination against homosexuals, so it's discrimination rather than oppression. If patriarchy was before class oppression, the nuclear family would be natural or biologically determined. But the nuclear family was the result of the development of agriculture, and this is why hunter-gatherer societies don't have nuclear families. So Iridescence 93, who's also a long-time supporter, friend of the channel, wrote some comments that I wrote responses to, or at least one. He sort of said something about being able to imagine a capitalism with a full, strong social safety net. And I said, in regards to being able to imagine a strong safety net that was still technically capitalist, it happened, and it was called the 1960s. The problem is capitalism by its nature demands endless growth. So even if you do get protections at some point, you will always be waiting to lose them, while the majority of society's wealth is controlled by a handful of people. Imagining a capitalist society with a social safety net is similar to imagining a USSR with freedom of assembly and PlayStations. It might be a nice thing to aim for, but how does it actually fit into history? Why would capitalism suddenly become more generous than it's ever been, especially now when it's had less resources than it's ever had? So that's all I've got actually written down. I think I'll stop there so it's like nice and sharp. You guys can jump in with comments, and we'll see what happens. Thanks for stopping by.
No, it's a pimp named Slickback, like a Tribe Called Quest. You say the whole thing. A pimp named Slickback.
Can we call you Slickback for short?
No, nigga, I'm a pimp named Slickback.
Crystal, who is this person?
Nigga, are you deaf? I'm a pimp named Slickback. Say it with me now.